Do you ever find yourself waiting for somebody to find you out? Like any minute now, they're going to realize that you don't actually belong in the room, even though you do. That creeping doubt has a name. And no, it's not a sign that you're broken. It's a sign you're growing. Welcome to the Building Resilience podcast, episode 234, Why Imposter Syndrome is Not Such a Bad Thing, part 1. Welcome to Building Resilience, a podcast where theory, practical strategies, and inspiring stories show you how to unlock your best life. I'm your host, Leah Davidson. As a certified life coach, speech-language pathologist, and nervous system resilience expert, it is my mission to teach you how to be more resilient to life's adversities. I will show you how to manage your mind, befriend your nervous system, process your emotions, and even eliminate stress. It's time to do more than just survive. It's time to thrive. Let's get started. So today we're talking about something that I bet at least 80% of you have felt at some point. I know I have all the time. Imposter syndrome. And this episode is actually going to be a two-parter because there's just so much stuff to fit into one. Because there's just too much stuff to fit into one go. So today in part 1, we're going to explore where imposter syndrome comes from, what's actually happening in your nervous system, your brain, and your body when it shows up, and 5 of the most common ways it tends to play out. Now, most advice out there treats it like a disease to be cured. But what if it's not? What if it's more like a post-workout soreness, an uncomfortable feeling for sure, but also a sign that you're stretching into something bigger? So by the end of the episode, you'll start seeing imposter syndrome not as a flaw, but as feedback. So let's get into it. Let's start with this whole idea about where it came from, because honestly, the backstory explains a lot about why we think about it and why we think about it this way. So back in the 1970s, 2 researchers named Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes were interviewing accomplished women. These weren't struggling students or people just starting out. These were successful women who had made it in their fields. And what they found was fascinating. These women kept on saying things like, I don't know how I got here, or I'm just waiting for everyone to figure out that I don't belong. Now, the researchers saw this pattern over and over, and they gave it a name, imposter syndrome. Now, they called it a syndrome, which kind of made it sound like a disease, like something was wrong with you if you feel this way. But these weren't women who were failing. These were women who actually were succeeding, often in environments where they were the only woman in the room or one of the very few. Now, there's this amazing analogy that Reshma Saujani used at a speech that she gave at Smith's College commencement back in 2023. You might have heard of it. So she's the founder of Girls Who Code. Anyhow, in this speech, she talked about something called bicycle face from the 1890s. Now, at that time, bicycles were becoming popular, and for the first time, women didn't have to wait around for some guy to take a horse to take them places. They could actually go where they wanted to go on their own. But here's what happened. The medical establishment, which of course at the time was entirely male, started diagnosing women with something called bicycle face. The symptoms? Well, flushed cheeks, heavy breathing, tense jaw, wide eyes. Now, does that sound familiar to anyone who's ever exercised? It's literally what just happens when your heart rate goes up, when you're exerting energy. But instead of recognizing it as normal physical exertion, they pathologized it. They made it into a medical condition to discourage women from riding bikes. And guess what? Only women could get bicycle face. Men doing the exact same activity, they weren't diagnosed. So Saujani then ties it into imposter syndrome. She says, what if the feelings we label as imposter syndrome are just the normal symptoms of doing something new, something that stretches you, something that takes you outside of your comfort zone? So think about it. When do you feel like an imposter? Well, when you're doing something you've done 1,000 times before? No. You feel it when you're stepping into something bigger, when you're taking on a new challenge, when you're growing. The problem isn't the feeling itself. The problem is that we've been told the feeling is a problem. We've been told that if you feel uncertain or out of your depth, that something is wrong with you. But what if nothing is wrong with you? What if you're just exercising muscles you haven't used before? So let's consider instead that maybe imposter syndrome isn't something you have. Maybe it's just something you feel sometimes when you're doing something that matters to you. And maybe that's completely normal. Now let's turn to talk about what actually is going on in your brain when you're feeling like an imposter. Because once you understand the inner workings, it kind of becomes a lot less scary. Now we always want to go back to the nervous system and the role of the nervous system. Its primary job is to keep you alive, not to keep you happy, not to keep you successful, not to keep you fulfilled, to keep you alive. And so from your nervous system's perspective, anything new or unfamiliar is potentially dangerous. So when you step into a new role or you try a new skill, you find yourself in unfamiliar environment. Your brain's alarm system starts going off. It's like having a paranoid security guard in your head who sees everything as a potential threat. Now, this is where neuroplasticity also comes in. Neuroplasticity is how your brain has the capacity to change and adapt. So every time you learn something new, your brain literally rewires itself. It creates a new pathway. But at first, it's a very, very faint pathway. A new neural pathway gets formed, and then existing connections get strengthened or weakened. But while you may have heard about neuroplasticity and how amazing it is, one thing we don't talk a lot about is how uncomfortable it is. When your brain is forming new pathways, it feels weird and clunky and uncomfortable and uncertain. Think about the first time you learned how to drive. Remember how you had to consciously think about every single thing, like check your mirrors and the signal, and look over your shoulder and ease off the brake and gentle pressure on the gas. So your brain was working overtime to create those new neural pathways. Now, when you drive now, you probably don't even think about most of those steps. They've become automatic because those neural pathways are well established. But in the beginning, it probably did feel overwhelming and uncertain, like you had no idea what you were doing. I think of myself right now. As many of you know, I launched a guided mental health journal back in January. It's called Resilience. It's available for purchase on Amazon, so make sure you go and check it out. And I have 3 more products that are coming out in hopefully the next year, all under the brand Resilient Brilliance. Well, let me tell you, it has been one of the hardest things I've ever done. Each product has brought its own learning and its own set of frustrations. I've cried many, many tears. I felt completely overwhelmed, completely deflated, and even scared. There has been so much to learn. Every time I turn around, there is something new to learn, from concept creation to graphic design to manufacturing to packaging to inspection to shipping, and then to selling and listing and photos and getting reviews and pricing and advertisement. It's really, really overwhelming. And you can bet that I feel like an imposter. Because initially, and right now, as I start doing this, I don't actually know what I'm doing first time round. My brain is literally building new infrastructure, and that process is very uncomfortable, truly very uncomfortable. But this uncertainty doesn't mean there's something wrong with me or I'm doing something wrong. It's kind of the feature of doing new things. It's evidence that I am growing. When my nervous system encounters something unfamiliar, it's likely going to read it as a threat. And when it senses a threat, it goes into protective mode. So that team hyper, the fight, flight, or team hypo, more of a shutdown, or a mix of both, where it's freeze. Now, these protective modes are supposed to help you deal with actual danger, like if you encountered a wild animal. But remember, the problem is your nervous system can't tell the difference between being chased by a bear and giving a presentation to your boss, or creating a new journal, or creating an ad, or asking somebody out on a date, or speaking up in a social setting. The physiological response is actually the same. Your heart rate increases, your breathing gets more shallow, muscles tense up, and your mind starts racing. And when this happens, your brain starts looking for evidence that you're not safe. And if you're in a new situation where you don't have a lot of experience to draw from, your brain will find plenty of evidence that I don't know what I'm doing. I might mess up. people might figure out that I don't belong here. So trust me, my brain is currently offering me all these things. But this response doesn't actually mean you don't belong or that you're not qualified. It just means that your nervous system is responding to something that is unfamiliar. The feelings are real, but the story your brain tells you about what those feelings mean might not be accurate. So when you feel like an imposter, instead of thinking something's wrong with me, try thinking my brain is responding normally to something new, because that's exactly what's happening. Now, the other thing that's happening neurologically is that your brain is constantly scanning for patterns and trying to predict what's going to happen next. And this is usually quite helpful. It's why you can walk into any grocery store that you've never been to before and still navigate it pretty well based on the typical pattern. But when you're in truly new territory, your brain doesn't have established patterns to work with. So trust me, last year when I went to China to meet some manufacturers for my journal and attend the Canton Fair, my brain had zero pattern to go on. I was so far out of my element and it threw my nervous system into protective mode. So then what we get is called pattern anxiety. Your brain is working harder than usual to try to figure out what's expected, what the rules are, how to succeed, and that extra mental effort feels really exhausting and uncertain. But again, it's not a sign that you don't belong. It's a sign that you're somewhere new and your brain is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, trying to figure out the landscape so you can keep safe and help you succeed. All right, now that we understand what's happening in your brain, let's talk about imposter syndrome, how it actually shows up, because it's not just one thing. Dr. Valerie Young, who's done extensive research on this, identified 5 different patterns. And I think it's really helpful to understand which one resonates with you most. So let's start with the perfectionist. If this is you, you set the bar impossibly high, and then when you inevitably can't clear it, because nobody can, you feel like a failure. Now, I see this a lot with high achievers. You've probably been rewarded your whole life for getting things right. So your brain has learned that your worth is tied to flawless performance. Now, here's the problem. Perfectionism isn't actually about doing good work. It's about avoiding criticism and judgment. If you're a perfectionist, you might spend way too much time on projects because you're trying to anticipate every possible way somebody could find fault with your work. Or you might avoid taking on new challenges because you're not sure you can do them perfectly from the start. Now, the irony is that perfectionism actually makes you less effective, not more. When you're spending 80% of your time polishing something that was already good enough, you're not spending that time on the next important thing. Now, secondly, there's the expert. If this is your flavor of imposter syndrome, you feel like you need to know everything before you can contribute anything. You're constantly worried that somebody's going to ask you a question that you can't answer. Now, I get this one too. There's this fear that if you don't know something, people will think you're not as smart as they thought. So you over-prepare for everything. You research topics that are likely barely relevant to what you're doing. You attend every training, you read every article, you take every course. And the problem is that you can never actually know everything. And while you're busy trying to become the expert on everything related to your field, opportunities are passing you by. So here's what I've learned. You don't need to know everything. You need to know enough to add value, and you need to be comfortable saying, I don't know, but I can find out when you don't. Now, thirdly, there's the natural genius. This is someone who's used to things coming easily. So if this is you, you probably picked up on new skills quickly as a kid. Maybe you were the one who didn't have to study much to get good grades. But maybe now you're in situations where things don't come naturally and as easily. And your brain is like, wait, this is hard. If I was actually good at this, it wouldn't be hard. Therefore, I must not be good at this. So this one's particularly tricky because our culture really promotes this myth that talent is innate. We love hearing stories about these natural geniuses. But the truth is, most expertise comes from deliberate practice over time, not from some magical inborn ability. So if you're struggling with natural genius imposter syndrome, you might abandon projects when they get difficult. You might avoid feedback because criticism feels like evidence that you're not naturally gifted. And you might interpret the need to practice or study as proof that you don't have what it takes. Now, next up is the soloist. They believe that needing help is a sign of weakness. If this resonates with you, you probably try to figure out everything on your own, and asking for help feels like admitting that you're not capable. And this one often comes from messages that we received growing up about independence and self-reliance. And of course, those can be very valuable traits, but if they're taken too far, they can become limiting. The reality is, nobody successful does it entirely alone. Even the most accomplished people have mentors and advisors and collaborators and support systems. The idea that you should be able to handle everything by yourself isn't realistic. It's not impressive. It's exhausting, and it's not the way we work. We are wired for connection. Remember that. Your nervous system needs connection in order for it to be healthy. So if you're a soloist, you might turn down offers of help. You might avoid mentorship and connection opportunities. You might struggle with delegation because you don't trust others to do the things the right way, which usually means your way. Now, lastly, there's a superhero. This is someone who feels like they need to excel in every single role that they have. Work, parenting, friendship, community, involvement, hobbies, everything needs to be done at 110%. Now, if this is you, you probably equate your worth with your productivity. You might even feel guilty when you're not being productive. You might have trouble setting boundaries because saying no feels like you're letting people down. So the superhero often comes from a place of wanting to prove that you deserve to be where you are. For example, I might not be the smartest person in the room, but I'll definitely be the hardest working person. Well, the problem is that approach is unsustainable. You'll burn out. You'll burn out trying to be everything to everyone. Now, here's something important to understand about all of these types. They're not personality flaws. They're not weaknesses. They're strategies. They were and are brilliant adaptations you have made. They're ways your brain has learned to try to keep you safe and successful. The perfectionist avoids criticism. The expert avoids being caught off guard. The natural genius avoids the discomfort of struggle. The soloist avoids the vulnerability of dependence. And the superhero avoids the risk of being seen as lazy or uncommitted. So these strategies probably served you well at some point. Your brilliant little you learned them as adaptations to survival, but now they may be limiting you more than they're helping you. So it might be time to develop some new strategies. And in case you're wondering, you are likely not just one neat and tidy type. You might be a perfectionist at work, but a natural genius when it comes to creative projects. You might be a soloist in your professional life, but a superhero at home. And of course, you may be a mix of all of them in different areas of your life. The patterns can shift depending on the context. And the goal is not to eliminate these tendencies entirely. It's to recognize them when they show up, and then to ask yourself, is this serving me right now, or is it holding me back? All right, that was a lot of information, but hopefully it was kind of comforting. Hopefully you're already starting to see imposter syndrome differently, not as a flaw, but as a signal that you're growing. So next week in part 2, we're going to go even deeper, and I'm going to walk you through what imposter syndrome is actually trying to tell you, how to regulate your nervous system when it kicks in, and some practical strategies to take action even while you're still feeling like an imposter. So if this episode resonated with you, don't miss next week's. I hope you found it helpful, and I will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Building Resilience podcast. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about managing stress, building resilience, and leading a more purposeful life, then make sure we're connected on Instagram and Facebook at Leah Davidson Life Coaching. You can also subscribe to my weekly newsletter at www.leahdavidsonlifecoaching.com/newsletter. Looking forward to connecting.